The night of November 10th, 2025 will not be a night like any other. Astronomers have called it the Black Moon, a rare phenomenon in which the sky seems to devour its own light. But what scientists explain with data and orbits, spiritual hearts feel as a sign that transcends reason. That night, the silence of heaven will break. That night, the veil that separates the visible from the invisible will be torn. For months now, there's been something strange in the air. The weather seems confusing, the days are shorter, animals are behaving strangely, and dreams are becoming unsettling. In towns and cities, old people and children say they have seen the same image. A woman dressed in white, walking among shadows, with a rosary that shone like fire and eyes that looked beyond time. He didn't speak. I was just watching. And in her gaze, there was a warning that the soul understood without words. Some said, "It's just a vision." Others responded, "No, it is she, the Mother of Heaven, who announces what is to come." Because every time the world is engulfed in noise, Maria chooses silence to speak louder. And when man no longer listens, heaven chooses signs that no human power can control. That black moon will be one of them, not as punishment, but as an awakening. In a small town surrounded by mountains, a woman named Eleanor began to write down what she heard in her heart every morning, after praying the rosary. He said that, in his prayers, a soft voice whispered words to him that did not come from this world. One night, as the moon disappeared behind the clouds, the voice was clearer than ever. The silence of heaven is not absence, it's a wait. When the moon darkens, many will understand what they refused to see in the light. Elena trembled. I didn't know if what I was hearing was a warning or a promise, but something inside her told her that she had to write everything down, word for word, even if no one believed her. In the following days, the sky turned a deep grey. Birds migrated in opposite directions, clocks ran fast and slow for no apparent reason, and people began to feel a spiritual weariness that was difficult to explain. The priests spoke of conversion, the media full of conspiracies. But in the midst of the chaos, pure hearts began to awaken, and that's when the messages began to multiply. In dreams, in prayers, in moments of silence, thousands of people in different parts of the world began to hear the same phrase: "Prepare yourselves, my children." Darkness does not come to destroy, but to reveal what the eye refused to see in the light. It was a phrase that resonated like a bell in the soul, and everyone interpreted it differently, some with fear, others with hope, others with tears. The most sensitive ones began to feel a maternal presence, which came not from fear, but from love, a presence that enveloped the soul and reminded it that the world is not alone. This is how, little by little, what many called the network of silence began to form. Prayer groups, people spiritually connected by the same calling, who prayed every night asking for light for the times to come. That network grew without leaders, without propaganda, without structure. It was something invisible but powerful, born of the Spirit. And every night, before going to sleep, they all repeated the same prayer that Elena wrote, inspired by the voice she heard. "Mary, Mother of Silence, open our ears to the whisper of heaven. Don't let the noise of the world drown out your voice." Then something began to change in the atmosphere. People who prayed devoutly began to experience small, inexplicable manifestations of peace, even as the news reported on wars, storms, and chaos. It was as if an invisible hand protected them from fear. But along with the peace, a sense of urgency also began. Many were saying, something big is about to happen, and they were right, because when the soul is ready to listen, heaven speaks without words. And what was to be revealed during the Black Moon would not just be a message, but a veiled warning from the heart of Mary herself. The ancient prophets had spoken of the day when the moon will turn black like sackcloth. But few understood that this darkness was not physical, but spiritual. The black moon represents the moment when humanity ceases to reflect the light of the Creator, and the soul of the world plunges into its own shadow. That is the point at which heaven intervenes, not to punish, but to rescue. And Mary, as in every age of darkness, appears first in silence, because her voice doesn't shout, it whispers. And in that whisper lie hidden the secrets of heaven. While men argued about science, politics, and religion, heaven was setting the stage for an event that would change the spiritual course of the world. A night where the silence of heaven would be broken by a luminous signal impossible to deny. Elena didn't know that her little prayer book would one day be read by millions, nor did he imagine that his name would become linked to one of the most profound revelations of recent times. He only obeyed the impulse of his soul that said, "Write, even if you don't understand." And that's how it all began, with a woman, a lit candle, and a whisper from heaven that would change history, because everything begins in silence. And on November 10th, 2025, the silence of heaven will break. The hours leading up to November 10th seemed suspended in an eerie silence. The clocks kept ticking, but the collective soul of the world stopped. The streets were filled with a tense calm, as if even the wind was waiting for something. And then began what the mystics had anticipated, the awakening of souls marked by the light. No one could explain it rationally, but thousands of people in different parts of the planet began to experience the same simultaneous sensation, a pressure in the chest, an impulse to pray, an uncontrollable need to look at the sky. At that moment, something inside them ignited. It wasn't fear, it was memory. The memory of something the soul had promised before being born, an ancient pact with the light. A spiritual seed that awaited the moment to be activated. The invisible call. It all started subtly. A priest in Poland woke up in the middle of the night, crying without understanding why. A young woman in Mexico felt she should light a candle and pray for the world. An old man in Argentina saw a luminous shadow that looked at him tenderly. And in different languages, the same voice began to repeat itself in their hearts. Awaken, children of the light. The silence will break, and they must be ready. No one knew where that voice came from, but everyone recognized it as something deeply familiar. She was not human, nor even earthly. It was a maternal voice, sweet and firm at the same time. That voice did not impose itself, it offered itself. He didn't command, he invited. And its echo began to travel the whole world, awakening sleeping souls as if a celestial breeze were blowing over the ashes of the spirit. Each person who listened to her felt a particular emotion. Some cried, others laughed, others simply remained silent, contemplating the mystery. But they all agreed on one certainty. Something sacred was happening, something that united them without borders, without religions, without languages. Elena, the woman who had received the first messages, began to have increasingly intense visions. I saw symbols of light etched in the air, as if heaven itself were writing on the world. Those symbols looked like ancient unknown letters, but when you looked at them, your heart understood them without needing a translation. One night he asked in prayer, "Mother, what do these signs mean?" And the answer was immediate. As if her soul heard it directly from heaven. They are the language that is spoken with the soul. They will be recognized by those who belong to the light from before time. They are the ones who, in the silence of heaven, signed a pact of love for these days. Then Elena understood. Not everyone would be able to see the signs, but those who felt them would be guided toward the same purpose, to be bearers of hope in the midst of the coming darkness. Those souls marked by the light did not bear visible signs on their skin, but in their hearts. An inner glow, a peace that did not depend on circumstances, a strength that sprang from living faith. And little by little, they began to find each other, even though they didn't know each other physically. Through dreams, chance encounters, and inexplicable messages. They all connected, forming a spiritual network that the material world could not understand. It was as if heaven were weaving a silent army of light, hidden among the crowds, invisible to the eyes of the world, yet absolutely real. On November 9th, the day before the Great Sign, the entire planet began to experience an unusual energy. Scientific instruments recorded strange magnetic pulses, lights in the sky, and changes in the Schumann resonance, that frequency that measures the Earth's heartbeat. The men of science sought explanations, but the souls who prayed knew it was not a natural phenomenon. It was the pulse of heaven touching the heart of the world. That spiritual vibration acted like a bell, awakening dormant consciousness. Many began to confess their mistakes, to reconcile, to seek forgiveness. Others, without knowing why, felt the need to return home, to hug their families, to look at the cross they had forgotten in a corner. It was all preparation. Heaven was aligning hearts, not the stars. That same night, Elena had a vision unlike any she had ever had before. He saw the face of the Virgin, partially covered by shadows, but with eyes ablaze like two sunrises. Mary looked at her with infinite compassion and said, "The time of silence is over. Heaven will speak, but not with thunder, but with the reflection of my pain. When the moon disappears, they will see what was always before their eyes. Do not be afraid. He who carries the light will not be put to shame." After those words, Eleanor fell to her knees. I knew the moment was approaching. The air was denser, the sky more still, and within the souls of millions, a certainty burned like fire. Something will be revealed when the black moon appears. As the night wore on, fears began to multiply. Some took refuge in prayer, others in skepticism. But those who had been touched by the inner voice knew that faith is not measured in words, but in endurance. Elena wrote in her diary, "Darkness is not the end, but the threshold, and those who remain silent with love will hear the whisper of God in the shadows." In various countries, they began to organize spontaneous vigils. There were no leaders, no structures, no official broadcasts. Only souls gathered in front of lit candles, silently waiting for the moment when heaven itself would breathe upon the earth. The elders said that something similar had occurred before major spiritual events in human history. There is always a silence before the miracle, and this time would be no different. When there were only a few hours left before the start of the lunar phenomenon, something happened. People on different continents began to perceive a heavenly fragrance, a scent of fresh flowers with no visible origin. That perfume, which many recognized as the perfume of Mary, spread through temples, homes, and places where people prayed fervently. Some fell to their knees, others wept silently. Elena then understood that heaven had already descended, even though human eyes could not yet fully perceive it. And in his heart he heard one last phrase before the great revelation: "The seal has already been placed. Those who have answered the call of the light will not be touched by confusion." At that moment, the moon began to lose its brightness. The shadows rose from the horizon like a blanket spread over the world. The air became cold, still, expectant. The prayers intertwined as one voice, and the sky prepared to speak. The clock read 23:59 on November 9th. In 1 minute, the day would change. And when November 10th began, the black moon would break the silence of the sky. Nothing would ever be the same again. The clock struck midnight. The day had just begun on November 10th, 2025, and at that moment, the black moon rose above the horizon, enveloping the world in a mantle so deep that it seemed as if the night had devoured itself. There were no stars, there was no wind, not a single animal made a sound, only silence, a thick, total, supernatural silence. The city seemed suspended in a suspended breath of the universe, and then that silence was broken. not with an audible sound, but with something that was felt within the soul. An invisible vibration, a note that no terrestrial frequency could reproduce. It was heaven speaking without words, and the souls who were awake understood it immediately. The time for warnings was over. In the midst of that total darkness, some began to see a faint light in the sky, not white, but bluish, like a luminous mist slowly descending. As it drew closer, it took shape, and before the eyes of those who prayed with a pure heart, a celestial silhouette appeared. It was she, the Mother of Heaven. Her cloak seemed made of the same silence that surrounded her, but her face radiated a tenderness impossible to describe. He didn't touch the ground. He floated on the darkness, and his gaze pierced the soul like a wave of love and pain at the same time. No one heard his voice with their ears, but they all heard it in their hearts. My children, the silence of heaven has been broken because the earth no longer listens, but there is still hope for those who love, for those who forgive, for those who pray sincerely. And as she uttered those invisible words, her weeping mingled with the mist. Small, luminous drops fell from the sky, and those who were touched by them felt an indescribable peace. Others, however, wept without knowing why. The soul recognized what the ego had forgotten. In different parts of the world, Italy, Mexico, Croatia, Argentina, the Philippines, people recorded the phenomenon. Security cameras captured lights dancing in the sky in the shape of a cross, and a glow on the horizon that looked like a beating heart. Scientists tried to explain it as atmospheric reflections, but something about those images defied all logic. The lights followed the rhythm of the prayers. Each time a group recited the rosary, the intensity of the glow increased. It was as if heaven responded to the human soul in real time. Meanwhile, Elena remained at home on her knees, holding the rosary she had used since her youth. Around him, the walls trembled gently, but not from an earth tremor, but from a living presence that moved in the air. She knew she had to write down what she was seeing, even if words were insufficient. In his notebook he recorded, "There is no darkness deeper than that which precedes the dawn of the soul. Today heaven weeps upon earth, but its tears are of love. Mary does not come to destroy, but to awaken." As the black moon continued its course, millions of people began to experience simultaneous visions. Some saw memories of their childhood, others saw deceased loved ones who looked at them in silence, and all of them, without exception, felt the same emotion, the pain of having forgotten God's love. It was as if, in an instant, the soul of the world looked at itself in the mirror. There was no trial, no conviction, only conscience. A profound recognition of all that had been lost due to pride, indifference, or fear. Many fell to their knees without understanding why. Others began to pray with a fervor they had never felt before. And at that moment, a wave of compassion swept across the earth. Time seemed to stand still. The sound of human breathing was the only echo in the middle of the universe. And then a voice was heard, not with the ears, but with the soul, that resonated throughout the planet. "No friends. I have not come to condemn, but to cover with my mantle those who still wish to love, those who hear me pray, because what is coming will be intense, but love will be even stronger." At that moment, the black moon began to shine from its center, as if an internal fire ignited it from the inside out. First there was a spark, then a golden line, and finally a glow that illuminated the entire sky with a silvery light impossible to look at directly. That light expanded in the shape of a ring, and within it appeared a radiant cross that seemed to beat to the rhythm of a heart. It was not an illusion. Thousands of people saw her, photographed her, felt her, and right in the center of that cross, the face of Mary was formed, not as a painting or a projection, but as a living, ethereal presence, smiling with both tenderness and sadness. Those who looked at her with humility fell into tears. Those who doubted felt fear. And those who rejected her experienced confusion and dizziness, as if the very energy of the sign were too pure for closed hearts. Mary did not speak with human words, but she conveyed a message that everyone understood in their own way. It was an urgent call, not of fear but of mercy. Children, the darkness that covers the earth is not the end. It is the mirror of the human soul. Many have turned off their inner light, and that is why the world has become cold. But there is still time. Love can still reign if the heart is open. Don't wait for external signs, because true revelation happens within. And as he uttered those spiritual words, a luminous rain fell from the sky. They were small spheres of light, like golden snowflakes, that dissolved upon touching the skin. Those who received them felt a gentle warmth in their chest, as if something were igniting inside them. It was the seal of heaven, an invisible mark on souls willing to love, a spark that would remain lit even when the world descended into chaos. As the glow began to fade, a deep sound filled the air. It was a bell, but it didn't come from any temple. His tone resonated directly in the spirit. A single blow, so powerful that tears sprang to the eyes of those who heard it, not out of fear, but out of an inner certainty. The time of grace had begun to close. Elena wrote in her diary, her hand trembling. Heaven spoke in silence. The bell was his last warning before the earth moved. And he was right, because after a few minutes, the animals began to move erratically. The air changed, and a low hum, as if the planet itself were exhaling, spread everywhere. But it wasn't destruction, it was purification. Heaven had spoken, and nothing could stop what was coming. Before the vision completely disappeared, the Virgin lowered her gaze. Tears of light fell from her eyes, and each one touched the earth like a silent ray. Where they fell, a white flower sprouted even in the most arid places. It was then that his last words of that night were heard. Do not weep for what is lost, but for what love can still save. Do not look for the sign in the sky, but in your own heart. And with those words, the vision vanished. The glow faded, the moon returned to its darkness, and the world fell silent once more. But that silence was no longer the same. It was a silence full of presence. Thousands of people were left kneeling, unable to move, feeling that heaven had been closer than ever before. Others began to record what happened, upload videos, and debate on social media. But the true witnesses knew that this could not be understood with the mind, but only with the soul. Elena closed her notebook with trembling hands. Outside, the stars were slowly beginning to reappear, and although the world seemed the same, everything had changed forever, because when heaven breaks its silence, nothing could ever be the same again. In the dead of night on November 10th, as the black moon reached its highest point above the horizon, something began to shift in the air. The animals in the fields stood motionless. The birds fell silent, and an almost supernatural silence enveloped the hills, the seas, and the cities. It was as if all of creation had held its breath. No one understood it, but something in the human soul sensed it. The heavens were about to speak. The most ancient prophecies, those whispered by the mystic saints and confirmed by the Virgin in her most recent apparitions, spoke of this moment. They said that a time would come when the silence of heaven would be broken by a sound that does not come from the earth. It would not be thunder, nor a human voice, nor a physical noise. It would be a vibration that would touch the hearts of men like an invisible bell, awakening in each one a lost memory, the memory of God's call. At 3 a.m., when the sky was a black abyss illuminated only by the opaque, reflectionless form of the moon, the phenomenon began. Witnesses in different parts of the world claimed to have heard a kind of murmur, a deep echo that came not from the air or the earth, but from within their souls. Some wept, others knelt without understanding why. Still others fled, frightened by an indescribable sensation, the feeling of being watched by an immense and loving presence. Scientists tried to explain it. They spoke of atmospheric resonances, electromagnetic waves, and collective auditory illusions. But the explanations crumbled in the face of the testimonies of thousands who claimed to have heard a soundless voice, a wordless message. Among those thousands, there were humble souls who received something more. Small fragments of messages, brief revelations, phrases that were repeated with the force of an eternal truth. No, friends. The time of purification has begun. I am with you. Listen to the silence of heaven, for within it is the voice of the Father. In Medjugorje, one of the visionaries who still receives messages from the Virgin Mary fell into a deep trance just as the moon reached its darkest point. Those present claimed that her body glowed faintly, and that words unlike anything anyone had ever heard before came from her lips. Later, in her notebook, the following was written in trembling ink. When the moon loses its reflection, the world will see what it has denied. In the silence, I will speak to the souls. In the darkness, I will reveal the truth. Do not fear the night, for within it beats the seed of light. Soon, heaven will open. Lydie, that message, brief but chilling, spread around the world in a matter of hours. Thousands began searching for spiritual explanations, and temples filled with candles, rosaries, and silent weeping. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper, a collective awareness that something invisible had shifted. Some said the air felt heavier, as if the atmosphere were charged with a new energy. Others claimed to have smelled incense, roses, or freshly baked bread, even though there was nothing around. Many asserted that for the first time in their lives, they had felt their hearts speak to them clearly. And in the midst of this global spiritual awakening, something happened in the sky. The clouds began to form a ring around the black moon. It was like an inverted halo, a circle of shadow within which tiny lights shone like moving stars. Some saw figures of angels in those lights, others saw luminous crosses, and some, the most sensitive, claimed to see the face of a woman of immense tenderness floating in the center of the firmament. It wasn't a physical face, but an ethereal reflection. They described her as a luminous presence that emanated peace. Her gaze seemed to embrace the entire planet. And then, without sound, without movement of lips, many heard the same phrase in their minds. Darkness has no power over those who remain in love. That moment changed the lives of millions. Some were converted again, others began to pray without ceasing, and many, for the first time, felt the urge to forgive. It was as if an invisible force had cleansed the air, as if the entire planet had been touched by a drop of mercy. But it wasn't all light. While some were filled with faith, others fell into despair. Those who had closed their hearts felt an unbearable emptiness. God's absence became evident to them, and the contrast between the peace of some and the torment of others became the sign of a spiritual division foretold for centuries, the separation between those who listen and those who deny. In those days, priests from various countries began reporting that during the consecration, the chalices trembled inexplicably, and the aroma of the consecrated bread transformed into a perfume that filled the entire church. In convents and houses of prayer, images of the Virgin Mary exuded crystalline tears, and in the most remote places, illiterate peasants awoke at dawn with an inexplicable certainty. She has passed by here. The sky seemed to have a new language, and those who knew how to listen understood it without words. It was the preparation, the prelude to the great sign. The messages spoke of the heavens opening in 3 stages. First, the purifying silence, then the awakening voice, and finally, the undeniable sign. November 10th marked the beginning of the first stage. The veil had begun to lift. Meanwhile, in Rome, theologians debated. Some said it was all mystical exaggeration. Others, that the apocalypse was being fulfilled before our very eyes. But the wisest remained silent, for they knew that there are mysteries that can only be understood in prayer. All of humanity was being summoned, without knowing it, to a decisive point in its history, a point where science, faith, and conscience would meet in front of the same mirror, the black moon, symbol of the human soul when it has lost its divine reflection. And just when silence seemed to reign supreme, something else began to manifest. A stream of light began to emerge from the eastern horizon. It wasn't dawn. It was something else. It was the announcement that the next phase had begun. The silence of the sky had been broken, and with it, the heart of the world began to hear what it had ignored for centuries. When the first glimmer appeared on the horizon, it wasn't the sun awakening the world. The sky wasn't the usual orange hue of dawn, but an impossible mixture of gold and ash, as if light and shadow were battling across the firmament. Those who looked east expected to see the sunrise, but what appeared was a sourceless clarity, a kind of suspended glow that seemed to emanate from within the very air itself. The clocks struck 6 in the morning, but time seemed to stand still. The birds weren't singing, the waves moved more slowly, and even the wind had a strange sound, as if the world were being enveloped by a layer of liquid silence. Something invisible had taken hold of reality. It was as if the entire planet had entered a suspended moment between before and after. In different parts of the world, people began to notice the same thing. Dawn had arrived without the sun. It was neither night nor day, but an intermediate state that ancient mystics had described as the grey hour of the world's soul. In that instant, humankind felt a mixture of nostalgia, fear, and hope, because they knew, even if they couldn't explain it, that something definitive was happening. In Medjugorje, the church bells began to ring on their own. No one touched them. The ropes hung motionless, yet the bronze vibrated with an unfamiliar melody. The inhabitants emerged from their homes, some weeping, others praying. The clouds drifted with supernatural slowness, and in the heart of that sunless dawn, a white light descended like a thread, touching the mountains with a radiance that seemed like divine breath. The testimonies multiplied. In America, farmers claimed that the rivers had become mirrors where they could see images of the sky. In Europe, pilgrims felt that the air tasted sweet, almost like honey. In Africa, elderly people recounted hearing their names called by invisible voices. In Asia, children gazed at the sky with inexplicable smiles, saying that the mother was smiling from the wind. It wasn't a physical apparition yet. It was a manifestation of presence, a spiritual sign extending over all humanity. The heavens didn't speak with thunder or lightning, but with vibrations that reached the hearts of the pure, those who still held faith, even if only a spark. That sunless dawn coincided with an astronomical phenomenon never before recorded. The black moon, which should have set hours earlier, remained visible in the sky, surrounded by a faint bluish glow. Observatories reported instrument malfunctions. Compasses spun aimlessly, satellites stopped transmitting, everything seemed to have paused in a cosmic pause. And it was in that suspended silence that the invisible choir began. Thousands of people around the world claimed to have heard the same thing, a melody so pure, so ancient, that it seemed to come from the beginning of time. Some described it as the song of angels, others as a symphony without instruments, others simply as a vibration that made them weep without knowing why. In the Vatican, the priests gathered for nightly prayer fell to their knees. One of them, old and frail, raised his eyes and murmured, "This is what the prophets saw, the prelude to the Great Awakening." The Pope, who had remained silent since the previous night, asked that no cameras or lights be turned on. He uttered only one sentence before withdrawing into prayer. "The sky has opened its throat. Let us listen before we speak." Outside the temples, humanity was divided between two types of reactions. humble, sensitive hearts were filled with peace. But the unbelievers, the arrogant, those who had made noise their refuge, began to experience a kind of inner anguish, as if something were calling them to surrender. Many tried to flee the phenomenon, but where can the soul run when all of heaven is searching for it? And in the midst of all that, the second big sign emerged. From the shadows of the black moon, luminous lines began to sprout, spiraling downwards like roots of light seeking the earth. Astronomers couldn't understand it. The beams weren't rays, nor auroras, nor solar reflections. It was something else. The cameras that were still working captured something indescribable. A figure emerging from the spirals of light. A feminine silhouette, immense and translucent, with a mantle spread over the world. It had no visible face, but its presence was unmistakable. It was neither fire nor shadow nor mist. It was the living manifestation of divine tenderness. Upon seeing her, thousands fell to their knees. In hospitals, prisons, schools and streets, men and women wept, feeling a love that passed through them like a gentle ray of light. Not everyone could bear it. Some fainted from the intensity of the experience. Others simply closed their eyes and said, "Mother, now I understand." But the most amazing thing was not the vision, but what came after. Each person who saw it heard a different message, but all with the same core, the call to return to love, silence, prayer, and forgiveness. Some heard, "Return home." Others said, "There's still time, but not much." And a few, the most spiritually awakened, heard a phrase that chilled their souls. "Before the true dawn, the world must pass through its last night." That phrase spread like wildfire. Social media, the press, religious leaders, everyone began to interpret it. What did the last night mean? A physical event, a spiritual one, or both? Was it a punishment or a purification? The ancient scriptures and prophecies seemed to converge on a single point. Isaiah, the book of Revelation, the Fatima apparitions, and the visions of the saints all agreed. A purifying darkness would come, a time when humanity would see its soul as God sees it. During the following hours, the phenomena intensified. Clocks remained out of sync. Daylight seemed to drag on. Some places remained illuminated with that sourceless clarity. Others were shrouded in deep gloom. Animals behaved erratically. Trees appeared to move in slow motion. The waters turned silvery as they reflected the suspended light. In Jerusalem, monks on the Mount of Olives claimed to have seen a column of light descending upon the ancient temple. In Mexico, farmers reported that the stars formed a cross in the sky. In Argentina, a group of worshippers claimed to have heard 3 consecutive knocks, like a heartbeat in the air. It was the prelude to something bigger, a sequence of signs intended to prepare the world for the next revelation, the full opening of the veil. The Virgin did not speak with stridency, but with presence. She did not demand, she invited. She did not condemn, she warned. Each soul felt her voice in the language of its heart. And the message was always the same. Wake up before the silence is completely broken. In that sunless dawn, as humanity trembled between the sacred and the unknown, the sky seemed to watch with compassion. There was no anger, only a loving, patient waiting, like that of a mother watching her lost child try to remember the way home. Scientists continued searching for a physical cause. Some said the moon had altered Earth's magnetic field. Others that the phenomenon was a collective illusion brought on by global tension. But nothing could explain the inner transformation of millions of people, because something had changed forever. The heart of man had been touched by a celestial vibration. And although the physical sun had not yet risen, a new kind of light was beginning to awaken within each soul. But the mystery was not over yet. Ancient texts spoke of 3 days of progressive revelation. The first was the silence that awakens, the second, the presence that moves you, and the third one, the one that was yet to come, the visible sign that would confirm everything. When the suspended light began to tremble and the air filled with a soft hum, everyone understood that the next chapter was about to begin. The sky, after centuries of patience, was about to reveal itself without veils. And the world, unknowingly, was entering the very heart of the mystery foretold by the Virgin Mary. As the suspended light began to dissipate, the earth awoke to a new murmur. It was not yet sunlight, but a warm glow that seemed to rise from within hearts. For hours, no one knew whether it was dawn or memory. The boundary between dream and waking had dissolved. The cities awoke still, as if someone had silenced the ancient noise of the world and left only the pulse of what is essential. The men and women went out into the streets without speaking. They walked slowly, looking at each other with a mixture of wonder and recognition, as if after centuries they were truly seeing each other for the first time. In the temples, the candles lit during the night continued to burn, but the prayer was different. They no longer asked. They gave thanks. It was as if the collective soul of humanity had understood something that could not be expressed in words. Scientists, philosophers, and leaders tried to explain what had happened. There was talk of magnetic fields, gravitational waves, and atmospheric coincidences. But no theory could contain the simple, silent fact that people had changed. Their gazes were longer, their gestures gentler. Children laughed for no reason, and the elderly seemed lighter. In the fields, the earth gave off a damp, new scent. Some farmers claimed that the seeds were germinating faster, that the trees shone with a different sheen in the light. In the cities, the artificial lights seemed too harsh, almost intrusive. Many turned them off so as not to disturb the newfound calm. In the following days, something like an invisible current swept across the planet. Those who felt it spoke of a warmth in their chests, an intuition that compelled them to seek forgiveness or to write letters they had postponed their entire lives. There were no commands or speeches, only a profound need for reconciliation. Some believed it was all over, that the black moon phenomenon was just a passing warning. But those who listened with their hearts knew that it wasn't an end, but a beginning. Because after the silence of the sky, what was coming was the inner voice of the world. One afternoon, a child drew the outline of a spiral in the sand. When the tide came in, the figure didn't wash away. The water seemed to respect it. The fishermen who witnessed the scene understood that the signs hadn't ended. The external signs were fading, but they were beginning to reveal themselves within each person. Mothers dreamed of doors of light, the sick of endless gardens, young people of cities where fear did not exist. In those dreams, there was always a figure who did not impose, but invited. This figure did not speak, but simply extended a hand forward, as if offering passage. In a remote library in the north, an old man found an authorless manuscript. It read, "When the sky is silent, listen to the murmur of the water. When the sun doesn't rise, look inside your chest. Where there is no sound, the true word begins." No one knew where that text came from, but it was soon copied and read in many languages, and so, invisibly, a kind of worldwide inner movement began. People stopped looking up for signs and started looking inward for meaning. Religions, once divided by dogma, discovered they spoke of the same longing. Spiritual leaders gathered without protocol. Some wept, realizing they had spent centuries arguing over names while forgetting the essence. Hands were clasped, and for a fleeting moment, humanity seemed like one family. However, not everything was rosy. In the corners where fear had taken root, change brought bewilderment. Some felt they were losing control. Governments, corporations, entire structures teetered before a population that no longer responded to fear or haste. Voices emerged that tried to reinstate the noise, to fill the air once more with empty promises. But the echo of silence remained, a reminder that something deeper was germinating. In the midst of this transition, the so-called Guardians of Dawn appeared. They had no uniform and no church. They were ordinary people, a teacher, a doctor, a pastor, a gardener. They gathered in silence at dusk and shared bread and water. They spoke not of salvation or punishment, only of presence. Their message was simple. The new light will not come from heaven. It will be born from the tenderness we cultivate. As the weeks passed, the sky returned to its usual rhythm. The sun crossed the horizon again. The tides returned to normal. But no one ever saw the world the same way again. Children pointed at the clouds and said they were softer. The elderly insisted that time had slowed down, as if the planet were breathing differently. In some places, luminous inscriptions appeared on the stone. In others, unknown flowers sprouted from the earth. They were discreet, almost humble signs, but they were enough to remind us that the sacred was still present. And so, little by little, humankind understood that heaven had not closed. It had simply chosen to speak from within. Every prayer, every gesture of compassion, every act of true silence was a new revelation. The mystery was no longer above, but in the way each person looked at the other. One night, as the stars regained their usual brilliance, an old woman, who had spent her entire life waiting for a sign, understood that her wait was over. Not because she had seen a vision, but because she had learned to see with the eyes of her soul. She smiled, closed her eyelids, and said, "Silence was not absence. It was a seed." No one heard her, but those words spread, as if carried by the wind from continent to continent, and although many didn't know where they came from, they began to repeat them. In classrooms, teachers taught students how to listen. In hospitals, doctors learned to heal with patience. In markets, people exchanged more stories than coins. Everything seemed to be reborn on a smaller, more human scale. Thus, the world after the silence became a kind of immense garden where every gesture mattered. It was no longer about waiting for a revelation to descend from heaven, but about being part of the everyday miracle, a greeting, an outstretched hand, a kind word. But beneath that newfound calm, something still stirred. For those who had witnessed the suspended light knew that this was only the first movement of a larger process, that the sky, after having spoken in silence, would speak again with visible signs. Ancient scriptures mentioned a second black moon, a reflection of the first, which would mark the true beginning of the new cycle. No one knew when it would arrive, but everyone awaited it in a different way, without fear, with gratitude. And while telescopes searched in vain for a precise date, hearts were already preparing, because what mattered was not the external event, but the inner state of the one who would receive it. In that serene waiting, humanity walked towards a horizon it could not see, but which it sensed in the depths of its breath. The sky had fallen silent, yes, but its echo continued to vibrate in every living thing. And in that echo, in that almost inaudible music that only the soul could hear, the next part of the story began. The bells of Medjugorje ring out every evening with a cadence that seems to come from the very heart of heaven. It is not just a sound. It is a constant reminder that time is running out. The air grows heavy as the sun begins to set over the Podbrdo hills, the place where the Virgin Mary continues to appear, with a divine patience that defies the centuries. But in this seventh part, the message becomes more urgent, sharper, like a cry that pierces the spiritual silence of the world. The war of the soul has begun. Maria no longer speaks softly. Now her voice has the tone of a mother, trying to rouse her children before disaster strikes. Hidden in her words is a warning that few understand. The armies are lining up, but not all are visible. The battlefield is within every heart. And then one understands. It's not just about external wars, bombs, or human armies. It's about the struggle for the soul, an invisible war in which every thought, every choice, every silence can decide eternal destiny. In Medjugorje, many pilgrims have felt this inner struggle. Some arrive hoping for a sign, others longing for redemption. But what they all find is a spiritual mirror, a reflection of their own hearts, divided between light and shadow. For while Mary calls for conversion, the enemy whispers that there is no more time, that it is too late. That is the great deception, to make us believe that mercy has a limit. But she insists, as long as the sun shines, as long as we breathe the air, there is still hope. However, there is something deeper behind these apparitions. Many visionaries, with tears in their eyes, have described visions in which the sky darkens and a voice cries out from on high, "The soul of the world is sick." At that moment, everything seems to stop. The wind, the singing, even the sound of rosaries. Because what is revealed is not just a vision of the future, but a warning for the present. The enemy no longer hides in the shadows. He acts in the confusion, in the division, in the coldness of the human heart. Mary says there are 3 weapons the enemy fears more than any army: the Eucharist, the Rosary, and inner silence. 3 simple acts that, if practiced with faith, disarm the plans of evil. For while the world cries out, the soul that prays in silence becomes a fortress. While nations prepare for war, the heart that kneels before God becomes impenetrable. That is the battle many fail to see, the battle of the soul that decides each day to whom it belongs. An elderly priest from Medjugorje recounted a story that many witnesses still remember. One night, while praying alone in the church, he felt an icy wind sweep through the temple, and an inner voice told him, "The world has forgotten that evil never sleeps." Frightened, he looked up at the altar and saw the image of the Virgin Mary illuminated with a golden light. At that moment, he heard another voice, gentle yet firm. "Do not fear. Where my name is spoken, darkness ceases." That priest understood that this was the essence of the message of Medjugorje, not to live in fear, but in spiritual resistance. This war is not fought with material weapons. It is fought in faithfulness, in forgiveness, in the capacity to love when all seems lost. Mary repeats it time and again, "My children, do not fight with the world, fight for your souls," because the enemy does not need to destroy cities if he manages to chill hearts. He does not need blood if he manages to erase faith. And that is precisely what is happening, a silent spiritual invasion, where values are inverted, truth is diluted, and the voice of God becomes a distant echo amid so many distractions. But there is something the enemy cannot bear, a mother who does not give up. That is why Mary continues to appear. That is why her tears fall upon the earth, because she knows that there is still a remnant of souls willing to resist, to believe, to love, and through them the world can be reborn. Every rosary prayed with faith is a sword that cuts through the darkness. Every Mass attended with devotion is a wall that protects the soul. Every act of sincere love is a ray of light that pierces the abyss. The cry of the mother is not one of despair, but of hope. It is the cry of one who sees the storm approaching and implores her children to return to the refuge of God's heart. Medjugorje is not just a place. It is a living warning, a heavenly echo that resonates in every corner of the world. And those who listen with open hearts experience a profound transformation, an inner strength that compels them to choose good, to fight for the light, even when all seems dark. Because in the end, the battle for the soul is not won with power or knowledge, but with love. And that love, the love that Mary teaches, is not learned with words, but with surrender. It is the love that kneels before the altar, that forgives the unforgivable, that trusts when the world crumbles. That love is the true victory, the one that no human power can ever take away. And as the bells ring again in Medjugorje, Mary repeats her message with a tone that blends tenderness and urgency. "My children, this is the last hour. Do not fear the darkness. I am with you." But what comes after that message is something that even the seers haven't been able to fully describe, something that will change the spiritual history of the world and mark the boundary between before and after. Are you prepared for what the Virgin will reveal in her next call? In Medjugorje, the visionaries always said that a time would come when heaven would stop speaking in gentle words, and instead a voice would be heard that would shake the very foundations of the earth. That moment, they say, is very near. In this 8th part, the message of the Virgin Mary reaches a depth and force that few hearts can bear without breaking. It is no longer just a warning. It is an urgent call, a direct announcement from heaven. Humanity is facing the point of no return, but there is still a door open. Enter now, before it closes. The air in Medjugorje feels different these days. Many pilgrims sense it. There is a silence that is not empty but expectant, a silence that precedes something sacred. The animals are calm. Clocks seem to beat more slowly, and the wind blows from the hills as if carrying a message that only the pure of heart can understand. The Virgin, according to testimonies, no longer appears with the same serene face as before. Her gaze now carries the weight of centuries of unheeded warnings. "My children," she says in a trembling voice, "the time of mercy is closing. Humanity has wounded love more than it can imagine." These words are not meant to instill fear, but to awaken those who still slumber. For while many continue living as if nothing were happening, the spiritual world is in a movement that few understand. The angels are taking their positions. The chosen souls are being prepared. The secrets that the Virgin entrusted to the visionaries, those mysteries kept under oath, are about to begin to unfold one after another, like the pieces of a prophetic clock that ticks on without stopping. And when that begins, no human power will be able to halt it. One of the visionaries confessed that, in one of the last apparitions, the Virgin showed him a vision, the sky divided by a brilliant light descending upon the world, while shadows writhed in fury. It was as if good and evil were being separated by an invisible line, he said through tears, and each soul had to choose which side to remain on. That is the essence of the message. Humanity is at the hour of its ultimate choice. It is not about religions, ideologies, or politics. It is about the soul, naked before its creator. But the announcement speaks not only of a warning, it also promises an unprecedented divine intervention, an act of love so powerful that even the most hardened will feel its effect. The Virgin Mary called it the instant of the soul, a moment when every human being will see their life as God sees it, a perfect reflection, an inner illumination that will reveal the truth of the heart. Some describe it as the warning, others as the great light. What is certain is that it will be the most merciful and at the same time the most painful moment in human history. In the blink of an eye, everything will be laid bare. Intentions, actions, secrets, hidden sins, unshed tears. This event, according to the Virgin, will not come as a punishment, but as a final opportunity. Many will fall to their knees, she said, not out of fear, but out of love, because they will understand how far they were from the heart of God and how long He waited for them, never ceasing to love them. However, she also warned that some will close their hearts even to this revelation, and these will be the most wounded, those who will have lost the ability to recognize the light. That is why she insists, do not wait for that day to change. Do it now, while there is still time. There are signs already beginning to appear. Skies tinged with red, where there was once calm. Unexplained lights above the temples, inner voices insistently calling for prayer. All of this is part of the prelude to that great event. But what is most unsettling is that the Virgin said, many will not recognize the signs because the noise of the world will be too loud. Distractions, technology, unbelief will be like a spiritual fog that prevents souls from seeing what is right in front of them. And yet, there is hope. Mary repeats time and again that none of her children will be abandoned if they choose to return. Heaven does not seek to condemn, she says, it seeks to redeem. But redemption can only come to those who extend their hand. That is why she asks for three concrete things: a return to confession, Eucharistic adoration, and consecration to the Immaculate Heart. Three keys that will open the door of refuge when the world enters the great purification. And this is not about superstition or empty ritual. It is about a real, profound, living spiritual preparation. It is the way to clothe the soul in light before the storm arrives. A Croatian priest, a witness to the apparitions from the early years, recounted a harrowing experience. One night, while praying the rosary on the hill, he saw a luminous figure weeping silently. He thought it was a pilgrim, until the light began to surround her, and he realized he was seeing the Virgin Mary. She looked at him and said sadly, "When men are silent about my name, the stones will speak." Then she vanished, leaving behind a fragrance of roses that lingered for hours. Since then, this priest has dedicated his life to repeating the message from heaven, reminding everyone that there is no time to lose, because the Virgin's announcement is not a myth, not a story to console naive hearts. It is a divine call that transcends centuries and borders. And those who truly feel it know that something profound is approaching. Awakened hearts perceive it, a vibration in the air, a spiritual tension that heralds imminent change. The world is about to be shaken, not only physically, but in its consciousness. All of humanity will be brought before the mirror of truth, and that instant will decide the destiny of generations. And when that day comes, because it will, Mary's tears will become the light that guides those who still believe. Then we will understand that all this time she was not warning us out of fear, but out of love, because a mother never stops calling to her children, even when they turn their backs on her, and her voice will continue to resound, even amidst the din, to remind every soul that it can still choose good, can still return, can still be saved. But after that big announcement, something even bigger will come. Something that will change the spiritual course of humanity forever. An event so profound that the oldest prophecies can barely describe it, and her name has been whispered by seers in hushed tones, like someone touching a burning mystery. It was exactly midnight on November 10th, 2025. The entire world was enveloped in a stillness that did not belong to nature. The animals were silent, the winds ceased, and the electric lights of the great cities flickered as if the universe were holding its breath. In the sky, the black moon slowly ascended, invisible to the human eye, yet perceptible to the soul. Many couldn't explain it, but they felt something in the air, an invisible pressure, an approaching presence. The world's spiritual clock had struck its hour. In the mountains of Medjugorje, a group of pilgrims were gathered in prayer. They weren't expecting anything extraordinary. They were simply seeking solace in prayer. But that night, something changed. The sky, completely dark, began to take on a metallic hue, as if an invisible veil were being lifted. Suddenly, a white and golden light appeared on the horizon, so intense that it did not come from any earthly source. It was not lightning, nor dawn, nor fire. It was a living, conscious clarity. One of the witnesses would later say that this light was not seen with the eyes, it was seen with the soul. Then the impossible happened. The sky tore open, not as a metaphor, but as a real opening, a crack of light that divided the sky in two. From that chasm emerged a sound no one had ever heard before, a pure, profound vibration, capable of making stones tremble and, at the same time, calming hearts. It was as if the universe itself were breathing, and in the middle of that opening, a luminous figure slowly descended. It had no body like ours, but its form radiated beauty, tenderness, and power. Many fell to their knees, unable to hold back their tears. Others, unable to bear the gaze, covered their faces. It was she, the woman clothed with the sun, as had been foretold since ancient times. Her mantle was not of cloth, but of light that flowed like living water. Her face could not be described without betraying its purity. In her hands she held a rosary of fire, whose beads burned without consuming. "My children," she said in a voice that seemed to rise from within each heart, "the hour has come when heaven and earth look face to face. I do not come to judge, but to remember. I do not bring condemnation, but truth, for the time of silence is over." Each word was a wave of spiritual energy. Those who listened felt their entire lives flash before their eyes, not as punishment, but as a luminous mirror. Every act, every omission, every wound they had caused or suffered appeared before them with a clarity that was both painful and merciful. Some began to scream, not from terror, but from pure remorse. Others stretched their hands toward the sky, asking for forgiveness. No one escaped their inner reflection. It was then that the entire earth seemed to stop. In different places around the world, Jerusalem, Rome, Fatima, Mexico, Russia, people began to experience the same thing at the same time. They all looked up at the sky without knowing why, and they all saw the same light, the same inner reflection. It was the warning, the instant of the soul that the Virgin had promised. A universal moment where every human being saw their conscience in the light of divine love. And while that was happening, the voice of the Virgin continued to resonate across the earth. "I have wept over your wars, over your lost children, over the love you have let die. But my heart still beats for you. Do not fear what is to come. Fear losing the light that is offered to you today, for what is dark will be illuminated, and what was hidden will be revealed. This is the beginning of the return of love." At that moment, an even brighter glow covered the sky. It was as if the sun had ignited within the night. People fell to the ground, overwhelmed by the force of the light, and yet no one was harmed. The mountains shimmered, the rivers shone like mirrors, and the air was filled with a heavenly fragrance. Some claimed to hear choirs, chants that belonged to no known language, harmonies that pierced the flesh. Others said they saw luminous figures all around them, like sentinels of the sky. In the midst of that glory, Mary extended her hands towards the earth, and something began to pour from them. A rain of particles of light, tiny like golden ashes. Where they fell, the land became fertile, the waters were purified, and people were healed. A paralyzed woman stood up. A blind child opened his eyes. A dying old man began to breathe again. The miracle was not selective. It flowed like a river of compassion over all who opened their hearts. But not everyone could endure it. In the cities, many hid, covering their ears, denying what they saw. Others insulted heaven, blinded by their own pride. And from that resistance, a tremor was born in the air. The light began to vibrate, as if the universe were demanding balance between good and evil. The Virgin Mary raised her eyes to heaven and in a solemn voice uttered words that no one would ever forget. "One last battle remains. The darkness has not disappeared, it has only been contained. But know, my children, that victory is in my hands. Whoever remains faithful to the truth will not be touched by the shadows." Suddenly thunder rumbled. The sky, which had remained open, began to slowly close. The luminous figure rose as thousands of souls cried out her name. "Mother, don't leave us," they pleaded. But she replied, "I am not leaving. I am only withdrawing for a short time, so that your faith may mature. What you have seen is not the end, but the beginning." And with those words, the heavenly rift was closed. The sky turned dark again. The black moon continued its course. Silence returned. But nothing was the same anymore. Human hearts had been forever scarred. Many knew they would never live the same way again. In the following days, the testimonies multiplied. Millions around the world reported seeing the same thing. Scientists were baffled, theologians debated, and the media tried unsuccessfully to explain what had happened. But those who had experienced it knew the truth. Heaven had opened, and humanity had seen its reflection. However, the Virgin had said that this was not the end, but the threshold. The real change was yet to come. The event that would follow the manifestation would mark the beginning of a new spiritual cycle on earth, a time of trials, purification, and hope. And while the men were trying to understand, in the heart of the night, a new sign appeared. A star emerged where there had never been one before, shining with a deep blue hue, as if watching over the sleeping world. The wise men understood that it was a sign of what was to come, the beginning of the great transformation. After the radiance of the black moon, the world was never the same again. Something invisible had changed forever. It was no longer about the signs in the sky or the tremors of the earth. It was the human soul that had been shaken to its very core. Millions of people in every corner of the planet awoke with a certainty they could not explain. Heaven had spoken, and its voice could not be forgotten. For days the air held a sacred echo. The trees seemed more alive, the sea breathed differently, and the sunlight, when it returned, had a new, almost transparent brilliance. Yet the most astonishing thing was not outside, but within hearts. Many felt an irresistible urge to forgive, to reconcile, to kneel in silence before something that surpassed all understanding. In that silence, some still heard the echo of the maternal voice that had descended during the night of November 10th. It was like a whisper saying, "Seek the key, it is not in the sky, it is within the soul." And then began the time of inner trials. For the announcement from heaven was not merely a revelation, it was a sowing. The light that had touched each soul was now beginning to sprout, but that seed needed care, faith, and perseverance. The world remained the same on the outside. Cities continued their rhythm, governments continued their struggles for power, and technology advanced. But beneath the surface, something was being born, a new pulse, a silent current of conversion and rebirth. In many places, small communities began to gather spontaneously. They weren't seeking to found new religions or escape the world, but rather to remember the meaning of their lives. In humble homes, in mountains, in deserts, and in forgotten villages, men and women met to pray, meditate, and listen to their inner voice. They didn't know they were part of the same movement. They were simply responding to the same call. All of humanity was being summoned, not by decrees or institutions, but by the spirit that stirred from the depths of their souls. But along with the light, the shadow returned. Those who had rejected the manifestation began to feel an unbearable emptiness. Some sought to deny it with science, others with mockery, others with violence. However, denial did not erase the truth. It only distorted it. And the more they tried to silence what they had experienced, the stronger the memory became. The world was divided not by political borders, but by an invisible one, those who had accepted the light and those who feared it. It was then that the rest of the message began to unfold. The Virgin had said that after the great illumination, a purification would come, not as punishment, but as the fire of love that transforms. And that fire began to burn. It wasn't a literal fire, but a profound process. Corrupt structures began to crumble, lies were revealed, and the powerful fell. What had once seemed solid dissolved like ashes in the wind. The foundations of the ancient world trembled, not out of divine hatred, but because truth cannot coexist forever with falsehood. In the midst of that apparent chaos, the hearts that had answered the call began to shine. They became beacons. They were the new witnesses, those who understood that the kingdom would not come with thunder and swords, but with burning souls, simple, unknown people who carried within them the flame of unyielding faith. The Virgin had silently prepared them for years, and now their mission began, to keep the light alive while the world was purified. Some of these witnesses recounted extraordinary experiences. They saw signs in the sky, heard melodies without origin, and felt the presence of beings of light. But the most striking thing was the inner certainty that they were not alone. There was an invisible force sustaining the human heart. Many described it as an unbreakable peace, even if everything around them crumbled. That was the key, unwavering peace. Because the ultimate secret wasn't in the heavens, nor in the messages, nor even in the prophecies. It lay within each soul that had accepted to gaze upon its truth during the black moon. That inner gaze had opened a door, access to the kingdom within the human being. Mary had said it in her last visible words, "Where love does not fade, there dwells the unbreakable. There the final key is hidden." And as the world underwent its purification, many began to discover that key. It wasn't a formula or a doctrine. It was a way of life. It was faith without fear, hope without conditions, love that endures even when all seems lost. It was the recognition that heaven is not far away, but rather beating deep within the heart. An elderly woman in Croatia, who had seen the light with her own eyes, wrote in her diary, "For years I searched for God in temples, in books, in apparitions. Today I feel him breathing within me. I don't need to see him. I recognize him in every act of love, in every tear shared." That is the miracle, discovering that heaven had hidden itself in the human soul, waiting to be awakened. That inner revelation began to multiply. Wars ceased in some places for inexplicable reasons. Enemies reconciled. Communities began to share what they had. Slowly, a new world emerged from the old, not with explosions or revolutions, but with gestures of quiet mercy. It was the kingdom being born from below, from the hearts that learned the meaning of the black moon. Not the darkness of punishment, but the darkness where light germinates. As time passed, the survivors of that generation would tell their children and grandchildren what they had seen. They would not do so with fear, but with gratitude. They would tell them that there was a night when the sky spoke, and that since then humanity has understood that the divine is not found in power or spectacular miracles, but in the capacity to love without expecting anything in return. And so, human history entered a new dawn. Not everyone saw it, not everyone understood it, but those who had been touched by the light knew that the essential task had been accomplished. The message had been delivered. Heaven had broken its silence, and the mother's voice had been etched in time, not as a warning, but as a promise. A promise that said, "Nothing can destroy what is born of love. Nothing can extinguish the light that one burning heart transmits to another. When the world goes dark again, remember this. Where true love dwells, there is unbreakable, and I will be there." The black moon disappeared from the calendar, but its memory lingered like a mystery. Some called it the sign of the end, others the beginning of a new era. But the wise and the humble alike agreed on one truth. Heaven spoke, and humanity awoke. Because everything that had been prophesied was not meant to instill fear, but to lead to that moment when the human soul discovered its true dwelling place, the inner light, the divine presence, the love that does not die. And so, in the silence following the last message, a voice whispered for the last time to the heart of the world. Stop looking for signs. You are the sign. Stop waiting for heaven to speak. Heaven now lives within you.